Hi everyone, welcome again to another table talk. I just wanted to have a bit of a brief discussion on some thoughts about, pardon me, about picking a radio. If you're just getting into the hobby, or if you're just getting into park jets, some things to think about on when selecting your transmitter. And again, this is based on my experience, kind of going back on how I first started off. When I first started off, I picked up a Spectrum DX6i, which great transmitter, very popular at the time, and I know there's lots of people at my field that still use them. Pretty straightforward 6-channel transmitter. The unfortunate thing with them is it had a couple of mixes, but it was fairly limited as my park jet career started to grow. It was a bit limited, and if I use the something happened when they programmed it. If you use the actual Elevon mix that was built into the transmitter, it actually reduced your available throws by 50%. So quite often, what I ended up doing was using one of these onboard mixers where you essentially plug the leads into two different channels, and then plugging your servos into this little circuit board setup. You could mix those two channels on board your plane, but that takes quite a bit of fussing around. Sometimes you have to put it in, you have to reverse the leads, you have to reverse how the servos are hooked up to it, you may have to reverse things in your transmitter. There's no there's no set way to kind of do it. The other thing that I had to use occasionally was this is a signal reverser, so depending on how your servo is mounted, you may want it going opposite, so that it's opposite to the other servo on the other side. So anyway, this all adds up to a lot of weight, and I remember before I picked up this, well, it was new to me at the time. It's not really very new anymore. This new transmitter, I had built an F18 version 2, and I had all kinds of different setups and mixes, and by the time I had 3 onboard mixers and Y harnesses and servo extensions. I had a ball of wire literally the size of a golf ball or bigger, and it added almost an ounce of weight to my plane, and it was very complicated. So the gist of my story there is that I spent about $180 on that transmitter 6 or 7 years ago, and I grew out of it very quickly as I progressed in my park jet career. So now, compared to 5 or 6 years ago, I mean, the selection of radios out there, or transmitters out there, is actually quite staggering, which is a good thing, and it's also a bad thing, because it makes it probably a bit difficult to figure out what transmitter you should pick up. What I would say, YouTube is YouTube again. It's good and bad. There's so much on there, but there's lots and lots of people who have done reviews and comparisons of different transmitters. This I may have mentioned in previous videos. This is an old Turnigy. Well, it was called the TGY9 in those days. It's a 9-channel. It's actually an 8-channel plus a battery setup. But what a lot of people were doing in those days, and what I did, was you could install a separate custom designed circuit board, and you would be able to flash it with a firmware that was called ER9X, which and around that same time OpenTX, which is what most of the FR Sky, like the Taranis QX7, those newer transmitters, that's kind of the firmware that they're operating on. So I'm assuming it's quite similar, but although this is an old transmitter, it's rugged and it's solid, and the mixing capability in this is only limited by my my imagination, and I'm able to, every channel port in my receiver, I can set it up whatever way I want, and I can fine tune. If a servo has its own channel, I can fine tune that servo and mix it whatever way I want. I don't have to worry about slaving things or anything like that. It has a very easy protocol for mixing once you get used to it. Now it doesn't, it didn't come with a manual, so it took again a little bit of searching around on YouTube to find out how to set it up. So this actually, I ended up with a far more capable transmitter for about 150 bucks. So I guess, long story short, I could have saved myself about $180 if I had gone this way first, and then, and not purchased the DX6i. But these, these are lessons that you learned. So, you can pick up some super cheap, inexpensive radios. I've seen transmitters on Banggood for 40, 50 bucks. So, but you have to do a little bit of research before you jump on that bandwagon and find out how capable it is, if you can, again, by researching on YouTube or RC groups, RC powers, that sort of stuff. Find out if it's a radio that will do what you need to do, but also have probably a bit more than what you want to do, so that you can kind of grow into it. Again, saving yourself some money, because if you spend 50 bucks on that transmitter and you grow out of it in a year, now you're gonna have to buy another transmitter. You can use that first transmitter maybe as a spare or a backup, whatever. But if you go to try and sell it on eBay, well, you're gonna lose some money on it. But and on the other side of the coin, don't necessarily you don't necessarily have to keep up with the Joneses and go out and buy the $1,000+ 4 on the floor, flush riveted, zircon encrusted, polyunsaturated transmitters either. So anyway, I guess the point of my discussion here is for your first transmitter, buy something that I would say buy something that is fairly popular, so that there's lots, you can get lots of information and support. Like I said, a lot of the I don't think that I don't know if again, I'm not trying to force people to buy the Taranis. I've seen a couple of Taranis at my field, and I've been very impressed with them. If for whatever reason my transmitter up and died, I mean, I have a backup to this one. I'll just take the board out of it and use it in the other one. But for whatever reason, if I had to start all over again, I'd probably be looking at maybe the Taranis QX7 or that kind of capability of transmitter, because it's got lots of abilities to chain, to program. Lots of people are using it, so lots of support, lots of ideas and thoughts on how to get it set up. I think I've seen it for over $200, but I've also seen it quite regularly. I think Banggood quite regularly has it on sale for like half that price, 110 bucks. The other thing you have to look at too, though, is that when you buy a transmitter, is have a look at the costs of the receivers. One of the things with my old Spectrum was the receivers were quite expensive. Then when Hobby King came out with the Orange RX series, when they first came out, those were Spectrum compatible. I could pick up a receiver for like $5. There's a lot of good and bad opinions about that Orange RX, but I had great luck with it, and I don't fly very far away from myself, so those worked out well. So that's another thing you want to look at, because you get an inexpensive radio, and then you go, okay, well, now I need to get some receivers for it, and you find out the receivers are going to cost you 40, 50 bucks or more. That's another thing to look at as well. So get yourself a transmitter, obviously, that you can afford, that you can use. Don't get one that's so complicated, it's got so many bells and whistles, you'll never be able to program it. Be patient with it. When I first got this one, again, it didn't have any sort of manual. I watched a few YouTube videos. I sat down, I plugged in an ESC and a bunch of servos, and then I just played around with it. I spent an afternoon just looking at mixes and all that sort of stuff, and figuring it out. If you've got a super simple transmitter, I'll see if I can find some links. This one is actually from Heads Up RC in the US. It's a really good onboard mixer, but I think Hobby King sells them as well. So just for Elevons only, you can get away with an inexpensive radio that has no mixes in it, and just use an onboard mixer if you want. So so have a look around, and if you already have a transmitter and you've flown fairly simple 3-4 channel planes where you haven't really had to do a lot of mixing, but you have the capability in there. If you're going to get into park jets, sit down with your transmitter, your manual, whatever, and figure out how to mix Elevons, and how to be able to have, as you progress, how to be able to have elevons and ailerons work independently of each other, so that the ailerons and elevons work together in the roll, but you don't necessarily have the ailerons working as elevators in the pitch axis, unless you want that. I know there's some people that fly that way, but anyway, so that's kind of my philosophy on it. Again, do some shopping around, take the time. I know there's a lot of stuff there, but there's tons of people that have done all kinds of reviews on the most popular radios. And for those that don't have a lot of stuff that comes from the factory, in order to save money, like some of the FR Sky ones, maybe, or some of the less expensive Fly Sky and things like that, if you do your due diligent research on YouTube, you can find all kinds of great information. So start off with a transmitter that maybe is a little bit more than what you might need for your first park jet, but that has the expandability so that you can grow into it, or you can upgrade it, whether it's with flashing it with new firmware, or new circuit board, whatever. Just long term, to save yourself some money, so that you don't buy one transmitter, grow out of it in 6 months or a year, and now you've got to buy another transmitter, learn a whole new protocol, maybe new way to program. I think it's, for me, if I was starting over, I would have got a transmitter with the capabilities similar to this one, that I could have just grown into. I would have saved myself a lot of money and a lot of hassle. I ended up donating that to an after-school program like Mesa RC here in Canada, so that some kids could get some good use out of it. But anyway, so there's my philosophy on transmitters, or picking a transmitter, or figuring out how to use your transmitter. Your transmitter obviously can really be your friend. You can do a lot of great stuff in your transmitter to help set up your plane and get your plane to fly exactly the way you want to. So take the time, if you have one already, learn if it's has the functionality that will help you if you want to get into park jets, and play around with some cool mixes, like having flaps, flapperons, spoilerons, V-tails, elevons, all kinds of crazy things to play with. It's a lot of fun to experiment. So there you go. Thanks very much for watching, folks. Blue skies, calm winds to everyone. Park jet noise, the other sound of freedom, baby. Take care.